Last video we talked specifically about Isaiah 53, which is a prophecy of Jesus' life and his ministry, and made it clear that his ministry would involve sacrificing himself for the sins of the world. And again, Isaiah prophesied about 600 years before the life of Christ. I want to briefly go over a few other prophecies found in the Old Testament. There are about 300 plus prophecies of Jesus that were either recorded in the New Testament, fulfilled in the life of Jesus, noted in the New Testament. So, and some of those are prophecy of the portrayal of Jesus by Judas. He was given 30 pieces of silver and threw it to the potter. And that's what is prophesied in Zechariah 11, 12, and 13. And you can see that when Judas betrayed Christ. You can see the description of his death in Psalm 22, written about 800 years before the death of Christ, before the life of Christ. Psalm 22:1 says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That is directly quoting from Jesus at the cross, although, to be fair, Jesus may just have been quoting that psalm. But the psalm goes on to say that everyone who sees me, they sneer and shake their heads. He relies on the Lord, they say. Let him rescue him. Let the Lord deliver him, since he takes pleasure in him. They gave me gall for my food and my thirst. They gave me vinegar to drink. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are disjointed. My heart is like wax melting away. It says, they divided my garments among themselves, and they cast lots for my clothing. They will look at me whom they have pierced. That's Zechariah 12:10. But Psalm 22 talks about Christ's hands and his feet being pierced, talks about all of his joints being out of joint, talks about them dividing his garments between them. They cast lots for them. And in Isaiah 53:9, it says that he made his grave with the wicked and with the rich man at his death, although he had done no violence and had not spoken deceitfully. And so in the New Testament, you see Joseph of Arimathea, a rich man who requests the body of Jesus after he was died on the cross. And so he was buried in a rich man's tomb, just like Isaiah 53:9 says. A few others, Isaiah 7:14 predicted that he would be born of a virgin. In Micah 5:2, it claims that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, the city of David. In Genesis 49:10, it says that the Messiah will be born out of the tribe of Judah. And then it goes on to prophesy that he would be born from the house of David. Bethlehem was the house of David. It also was technically in Hebrew the house of bread. And Jesus claimed to be the bread of life. And of course, the lambs that were sacrificed at the Passover were specifically pastured in the hills of Bethlehem. David used to be a shepherd to those particular spotless lambs. And it was on the Passover, when the lambs were to be sacrificed for the Passover feast, that Christ was crucified. And so the connections between the Old Testament and the New Testament are incredible. The prophecies that were fulfilled in the life and the ministry of Jesus, hundreds and hundreds of years before he was born, are incredible. Many scholars in the early 20th century, late 19th century, who doubted the authority of Scripture would look at those prophecies and say they were later additions, so that there would be a correlation between the Old Testament and the New Testament. But as I mentioned earlier, the Dead Sea Scrolls just shoot that out of the water, because they were dated, and you had, the entire scripture of Isaiah, much of Psalms, much of what we call the Old Testament, except for Esther, found dated 300 years before the birth of Christ. So even if you say that those documents were new, or copies, new copies of new documents, and the prophecies are only 300 years old instead of 600 or 800 years old, still it is an incredible, what you might consider coincidence, given how closely aligned the New Testament story is with the prophecies that we find in what Christians call the Old Testament, or what the Jews would call the Tanakh. So I'm going to leave it here in terms of Old Testament prophecies, and there is much, much more to say that folks can research themselves on the Google machine. But I just wanted to point out how really incredible it is that so many prophecies that are recorded in the Old Testament are fulfilled in the life of Jesus in the New Testament, in the Gospels. Thank you.